All right, everyone, let's get started then. My name is Natalia Modjeska. I'm a research director with Omdia, a market intelligence and research firm. And welcome to this panel, Navigating Commercial Needs with Responsible AI in Mind. So with AI applications having pretty much gone mainstream, the dark side of artificial intelligence is also becoming more pronounced and more worrisome. Everything from bias and discrimination to deepfakes and nudging. And business leaders and governments around the world realize that that's an issue. And the only way to obtain sustainable and equitable business benefits is by doing AI responsibly. So what does it mean, and how do we get those benefits we want, and in a responsible manner? To help me unpack this fairly meaty topic, I've got fantastic panelists. So to my left is Paul Hecht, Senior Product Marketing Manager from Telus International. I also have Andy Terrel, who is Vice President of Machine Learning at Korbit AI. And finally, last but not least, is Brian Yang, who is the Senior Director of Product Strategy at Verint. Welcome, all of you. Thank you for joining me. Now, why don't we start with, can you maybe tell us a little bit more about your companies and your role there and what you do, so the audience sort of knows a little bit more. Paul, I'll start with you.
Thanks, great to be here. Telus International is a digital transformation company working across multiple service lines. I work in the AI data solutions business, where we try and help our technology customers solve their greatest AI data challenges, specifically around data creation and collection, annotation and labeling, search relevance, and NLP.
Hi, I'm Andy Terrel. My company, Korbit AI, is an education technology company using personalized AI tutors to help teach data science and programming exercises and so forth. We're a leader in making a dynamic, very personalized experience in learning. And we were working with a lot of corporations teaching the skills they need to do data science and machine learning at the enterprise scale.
Hey everyone, Brian Yang here. So Verint's a customer engagement company. We specialize in technologies around workforce management, experience management, and digital-first engagement. So my role there is I'm a senior director on the product management and strategy side for digital first, specifically covering our self-service products, which include our conversational AI technologies, as well as our IVR and community products.
Thank you. All right, so given the industries you're in, where is responsible AI coming in? Why is it a concern? Can you talk maybe a little bit more about use cases, issues, maybe also about best practices? You know, again, the topic is balancing commercial needs. We want all to get benefits from AI, but at the same time, you know, hopefully without harming our own organizations and our customers, partners, citizens. So can you a little bit tell us more about it?
Maybe I'll go first. In education, responsibility has been a forefront for a lot of digital technologies for a long time. Things like making sure you're giving the right information to the students, but also hiding student data from others who might be taking advantage of that data. And so just data governance at the very beginning, at the outset. And that goes for your models as well. I mean, I often like to tell people, like, look, your ML model is only going to see what you give it, and if you wouldn't give this sort of data to a teacher or a TA at your school, so why would you give it to your ML model? But we do have to go beyond that, because as we know, like, ML models are very good at finding latent variables that they bring out the biases of the sample data there. So yeah, in our case, with NLP and conversational bots, often like just the language that's used has to be very generic, and we have to monitor and make sure that when we get answers in and we have annotations, it's like, all right, you might call this a classifier in one setting and logistic regression in another setting, or someone calls it a predictor in another setting, and well, those are all good answers, and actually incorporate more of the answers and more of the language that is used across the different stakeholders and use cases. And so by just one, monitoring how people are using our system and making sure that it's inclusive of the language they would use elsewhere, but also proper data governance and making sure your models have that data governance attached to them as well.
What about you, Brian?
Yeah, so in conversational AI, I mean, we do a lot of use cases that run across multiple verticals, and I think there's a lot to be concerned about and worried about whenever you're working across sensitive areas, right? So we do a lot of work, for example, in life sciences. So we're talking about people's medication and symptoms and things like that. You have to be really careful about how your model responds and making sure that it works really well, right? So to me, one of the most important things about any sort of AI model, but specifically when it comes to conversational AI, is having a lot of visibility into what influences a model, right? And how do you train that model? One of the things that we commonly run into, especially from a text classification perspective, is a lot of people are inclined to put a lot of data in, right? And just sort of put as much data in as possible. And what we find is that that typically does not lead to very good results, right? There's a lot of research that actually shows that for single labels, once you pass about 900 or so training data sets, the returns on additional data pretty much drop off to nothing, right? So it's actually more important to have quality data, right? High quality data that's representative versus just pure volumes of data. And then that's something that we struggle a lot with, especially when we convert customers from prior customers into the way that we do it.
So big data is not always the answer. It's really quality data, smart data.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Paul, what about you?
So I think it's really important, like responsible AI is at the forefront of everything. And one of the reasons is, and we need to remind people, like AI is really difficult. We're at the baby step stage. And some people say up to 90% of models don't make it into production. So a lot of work is being done just to push the peanut ahead a little bit. So I think it's really important the diversity of data is really important. And as a vendor, as a corporation, it's important to say, can we actually responsibly deliver against the use cases put in front of us? And often the answer is no. And we will walk away from work that could be quite lucrative because we don't think we can get diverse enough data sets to ensure that the model's going to perform. And as I said, it's hard enough to get a model into production. So if we don't think there's a good chance, you just have to say no.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. That your organization is willing to go away. Okay, that's very powerful. So I'm going to try to unpack a couple of things you mentioned. A bias, for example, right, and data bias that some of you, actually pretty much all of you, alluded to. It's a source of many documented harm with artificial intelligence. In particular, in conversational AI, right? I mean, AI, despite all the progresses, conversational AI still has difficulty understanding some regional dialect. Let's just take English as an example, or immigrants, the way they talk, or even women sometimes. So how do we address that? And I think, Paul, you alluded to some of it. It's partly diversity, right? But what else?
You want to start with your conversation, and then I'll go on to some other stuff?
Yeah, so in conversation, I think it's always really fascinating. I mean, I think there's a lot of conceptions and misconceptions around what it takes to build AI and what's in AI, right? Especially when you talk about conversational AI. I think one of the really important things is that, from a commercial perspective, right, there's pretty much no one in the market doing unsupervised learning, right? Everything is pretty supervised. So you actually have a lot of control over what's fed into the models. And you also have full control over what's spoken out back by a model, right? So there's not, in a commercial setting, I've seen very few situations where people have actually tried or even wanted to try natural language generation, right? That's a very infant technology. So most of the focus today is on natural language understanding and how do you apply that understanding. So the most important thing in regards to that, I think, is always about the tools that you have to use to understand what's going on, right? To understand if a bot's succeeding or failing and why and how to fix it, right? The procession of activities is something that I think a lot of people still struggle with. A lot of technologies still struggle with today. And that's really the key to being able to understand what's going on so that you can actually make adjustments that are appropriate.
And is it because we're attributing too much intelligence to artificial intelligence?
I think that's a pretty fair statement, right? I mean, I think people imagine AI coming in and being a silver bullet to a lot of the problems that companies run into, right? Like most companies have problems still with getting content out to people, right? There's massive volumes of content you might have stored in a CMS or a KM. How do you expose that to your users in a intuitive manner is a struggle that I think every corporation still deals with, and a lot of people look to conversational AI as being that solution, right? But the reality of it is like it's never going to be a silver bullet. There's a lot that goes into it, a lot of thought that needs to go into experience, and how do you shape that customer experience? That's actually really what matters, right? It's not the understanding piece. Like that technology is there, it exists. Those models can run decently, but it's what do you do with that information, right? How do you take the context of the user, what they're looking for, what they're trying to do, and wrap that into something that actually allows them to get something done is really what we focus on.
I think diversity, again, for us when we're dealing in Brian's talking about conversational AI, which has different restrictions than, say, autonomous driving data, which needs tremendous amount of data all the time, so endless amounts of data. But even in other sort of image-based data, for us, diversity is key. We work with a community that's represented by in over 100 countries and 500 languages and dialects. And diversity is everything. We're concluding a study with one of our technology partners to actually validate the diversity of the community that does our data annotation. It's the first of its kind, and it's really, really important because our partner wants to be able to hold its head up and say, we absolutely can claim with 100% confidence that we have accurately represented the audience that our technology is going to touch, and not everybody's doing that, but more organizations need to aspire to do that.
I guess, so we do a lot of text generation and unclassified things, so maybe we're a little bit of an odd duck compared to what Brian sees in the market, but I do think that for us, a lot of it comes back to the, adding the human annotator kind of systems into what we're doing, so that to let the AI systems actually explore the space of configurations and explore the serendipity that comes out of having a corpus of people interacting with your system every day. And so that for us, like a big part of that is just that iterative updates and bringing different QA systems and different people to test out the system and see how it's working. I mean, there's also a lot of statistical methods that you should be using, so testing the bias of your data. While I commend people for bringing in diversity, there's still an effect that you can have in your models. So if I have a model that's giving out bank loans, it doesn't matter if I have African Americans, in the training set, if I still give African Americans $0 for that loan. So you absolutely have to do statistical black box testing on what your biases are. The banking industry in the 90s in this country went through this in tremendous ways, where they had to shut down lots of savings and loans, and lots of places that were doing practices, this is a diverse practice, but the effect of your practice was actually not a fair practice. And I've done work in the real estate industry where there's draconian laws passed because of the same thing that humans were doing. We're like, oh no, it's a fair practice, yet no underserved minority can get into this community or something. And so I absolutely think that no matter what you're doing, you have to bring rigorous statistical testing for those biases if you're going to produce any sort of model in production in the commercial world.
One other thing, and I've heard it fortunately echoed throughout the conference the last couple of days, is it can't be the sole responsibility of a group of data scientists in a lab. It has to be top to bottom in an organization, and more than merely paying lip service. I heard the CTO of Daimler Trucks this morning talk about how they've ensured that there's data science 101 and AI 101 throughout the organization. And it's a big company. And I think those are the types of steps that need to be taken to ensure that everyone understands the technology and that bias can be tackled.
So raising AI literacy is critically important within the organization. Completely agree. And you touched upon an interesting point, is responsibility or accountability. So let me ask you this. Who do you think should be responsible with, let's say, an organization, whether it's a vendor of AI systems or an organization that's adopting and scaling AI, who is ultimately responsible?
And I assume you are curious about regulators as well?
Well, we can start with an organization, we can go to regulators.
I mean, I think it's a whole ecosystem. I think that consumers are responsible.
In what way?
We get to vote with our wallets, right? Like,
Do you guys agree? Yay, nay, maybe?
I mean, you can take a really passive stance about how your information is shared, and I know you want to ask us about regulation later, so we can get to that. But within an organization, I think again, it's a balance, and this is a business, and we have to remember that. But we also, we have to scrutinize the work that's being done, because everything is out there eventually. So I think it's incumbent upon the organizations that's releasing the product to be able to show transparency to its customers. And again, customers are going to be more loyal to organizations that are transparent, that know that their data is safe and that the methods they're using are responsible.
So I think I hear that you're saying that everybody in the organization is responsible, and outside, even consumers, we all are essentially are responsible.
That's what I feel.
What about you, Andy, Brian? Do you agree, disagree?
I just agree with this notion that the consumer is responsible for the ethics of the AI systems and the responsibility of the AI systems put out by commercial world. Most times, the commercial world is hiding it. Like, you don't know. I mean, how many people knew that Starbucks had an AI like picking people's when they served you at a Starbucks? If I walk into Starbucks, I don't expect them to be living under an algorithm that's harming their life, right? And so the way the corporations have worked has hidden a lot of these details, and it's made it so that it's coming out now a lot more about like the treatment of folks and things like that. But it's incumbent upon we as technology leaders who know how these systems work to like, no, you're abusing people, and speak up. And I agree with like the organization. You should teach everyone in the organization. But ultimately, anybody who's touching an AI system and they don't see it following principles of actually exposing that it is an automated system and that there are certain biases and how that works, I think they're not being fair to or responsible in the commercial space.
Should there be an internal AI whistleblower program then?
I'm sorry, an AI?
AI whistleblower program?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of companies are doing AI ethics audits. I've gone through them with when I vendored with AWS and with other companies, and absolutely necessary to start bringing in AI audits into your entire ecosystem whenever we go through cybersecurity audits, we should definitely go through AI ethics audits at the same time. I mean, it's a no-brainer to me.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think I think there's a degree of responsibility that everyone holds at the end of the day, right? Because I mean, it's unfair, I think, to necessarily pin everything on one area. I mean, but I think ultimately corporations are the ones that are accountable for it, though, right? Like I wouldn't hold a consumer accountable for something that a company might be doing that might not be the right thing to do. I think the key thing at the end of the day, though, is transparency and knowledge, right? About how data is used, what data is collected, and how it can be used, and where is it going to go, right? I think those are key things. I mean, you see all sorts of laws being passed about GDPR, and we work with all sorts of countries where the companies are not allowing data to leave the country anymore, right? And so there's protections I think that are being put into place, but I mean those are pretty brute force in my opinion, right? Because you're also losing a lot of value there. So but to me the key is always about transparency, knowing where it is, how it's being used, and bringing that general awareness right to the public. I think is something that needs to happen.
So how do we do it practically? Raising that awareness, being transparent with our customers, with our partners. Maybe even our own employees, right? So how do we do that? How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it, we do a lot of it through how we talk about our tooling, right, and how we express our AI capabilities, right? We try to be very open in terms of showing the workflows that we use, that we leverage to tune models, adjust things, adjust experiences. I think in general though, I think it's a broad mass education thing, right? It kind of reminds me of a commercial I saw, which I can't remember the company, so it obviously didn't have the intended effect, but the commercial had it was like they're shipping packages, right? And the guy in the store pulls out a pigeon, and they start to tuck the little mail in the pigeon. And everyone's like, whoa, that's not secure. And he's like, well, that text message you're sending isn't secure either, right? Most people don't know that, right? And that's a fact. And I think along the same vein, right? There's a lot. It's like any technology that people don't necessarily know all the details about, but those things go out, and that data is accessible to potentially to some people, and can be used in all sorts of different ways, right? So it's a mass education thing that I think sort of just has to come over time, generationally, right? It's sort of, there's no way to mass educate every single person.
I don't know much about the Starbucks example you pointed out, so I'm speaking from a bit of ignorance, but I can imagine that use case is meant to, and I don't want to be seen to be defending anyone else, but what I would assume it's meant to replace or improve is human bias, right? So the human bias of the person behind the counter deciding I'm going to serve you instead of serving you. And we also have to, no, I don't know enough about it.
There's great ProPublica talking about how this works in education. ProPublica, if you don't read it, go read these folks, because they've done a lot of work looking at responsibility of AI and systems. And so the story with Starbucks was they have your time period, like when you work, is based on a automated system that figures out when you should be in and when you're not. And what was happening is a lot of people would be required to come in for an hour, and then 6 hours later come in for another hour, and then people were being docked pay and things like this. So it wasn't for the customer. It was just to save the corporation money, and it made the lives of their employees worse, which is why we're seeing, labor unions pop up in Starbucks right now.
No, that makes sense. I thought it was replacing bias in consumer. But the other thing is, I think publishing how technology is being used. I think we will see more of that, and I think consumers and regulators alike are going to require it. So it might not be in the shop window, but publicly traded corporations and smaller corporations, but publicly traded organizations, I believe, will begin to be required to publish more of how its technology is being used with respect to AI.
Something like those, what are they, food labels, ingredients list on the back of every package, like calories and what have you, for every AI system?
It's a bit of a North Star view, but perhaps. Okay. Does that impact behavior?
Oh, that is a good question. By the way, Kate, I think you need to keep me on time because what time is it? I just want to make sure because we've got 10 minutes, right? Okay. Yeah, I know we stand between you and lunch, so I do want to also save some time for questions, by the way. So if you have any questions, I will save about 5 minutes. Let's cover a couple other topics. So we touched upon trust and trustworthiness a little bit, actually quite extensively, and how important it is, and how we can work on raising that level of trustworthiness with our own customers, employees. So we talked about, for example, proactive disclosure, right? We talked about data governance. What else can we do to ensure that our customers, our partners, our organizations trust us?
So number one is just use a lot more explainability in your ML approach. Get away from these black box algorithms that you can't tell what they do. It's like, oh, we have a billion numbers that determine that you should get a job or not. Rather give, and I think Brian hit on this with transparency, give this decision was made based upon these factors, and that was the most important factors that we saw in whatever decision. I think you're seeing that happening in government with Biden's executive declaration, with this notion now that a lot of governances are looking as any decision made, especially in a court decision or other kind of job-related decision. I think there's some labor regulations coming out, where it's just these are the factors that determined, just like whenever, if I go out for a job and I know who the hiring manager is, I can say that hiring manager didn't hire me, and if you see that it's because I'm a member of a protected class, I can sue that company, and then we can point to that hiring manager. And so we already have that sort of paper trail about what happens on certain decisions that we've already got regulation around, because we know they're very sensitive, and we need to make sure that our algorithms are actually pushing out what are the factors. And it's not a hard problem right now. We have lots of algorithms that do. Explainable ML was rocket science 5 years ago. Today we have SHAP values. We have lots of different methods of doing it, and so just bringing that to the table of making it a commonplace of like, why did you make this decision?
We've published our responsible AI guidelines. So it's narrow for the work that we do, but it's right on our website where we talk about what we do with the data, how we make sure that workers and the community they're working with are paid fairly, what we do with data security and privacy. So it's right there. That's a start. We have to hold ourselves to that and our partners to that. But it's the beginning. It's out there. It's transparency.
Yeah, and I guess the example you brought up earlier when you walked away from a project, that's really powerful too.
Yeah, I think, and I totally agree with what you guys are saying around this. I mean, I think one of the big things that we try to do, especially in the conversational AI space, is we try to expand expertise, right? I usually hate this term because it's way overused, but like democratizing AI is sort of a goal in conversational AI, especially because the idea of leveraging AI in conversations to self-service customers is something that we want to be approachable for all companies, right, and all organizations. And so we spend a lot of our time helping build expertise within the organizations that we work with and really trying to move away from that black box approach, right? So it's not always our teams doing it, but it's building the right tools so that really anyone can come on, learn how to do it without a data science background and really just opening the doors, right? And I think that hands-on experience then allows that expertise to foster and grow within the other organizations, right? And that propagates, I think, a lot from there.
Yeah, and I think that's tremendous values that you can bring as vendors of artificial intelligence systems, right? It's educating your customers, because we noticed earlier this year that market moved into a very different maturity stage. It moved from early adopters of AI into early majority, and these organizations typically don't have their own AI expertise, and so they're looking to vendors to kind of educate them, to help them, to get them kick-started with AI. So that's tremendous. All right, are there any questions from the audience? Okay, gentleman over there. You need the mic.
Thank you. Ben from AI Business. Question for the whole panel, please jump ahead. You mentioned a little bit about regulation. We didn't go into it too much, but I found it interesting that the White House published the AI Bill of Rights, talking about like responsible guidelines, but it was just a white paper. It wasn't anything tangible into law like the actual Bill of Rights. Is that a bad thing? Should we actually have a physical piece of governance in place that enforces law, or is it a volunteer option as the only way?
So, okay. So what Biden published was like the start of how like laws get made, right? So you have an executive mandate. They have some piece of like, hey, we want to do things this way, and that starts the conversation among litigators, right? And should there be certain rights for citizens? Absolutely. Like, and how far that should go is going to come to, like, we as voters have to figure that out. Like, if I'm going to be, just like breathalyzers used to be, you couldn't get anything, any code or any actual evidence that breathalyzers worked, and like, for the most part, that's kind of gone away, whereas like now you have to actually have experimental data and things like that in the breathalyzer, because they were being abused by our law enforcement agencies. Like, oh yeah, I can get my prosecution, which is their job, with this breathalyzer. Now, it's incumbent upon us as a community to make sure that the tools they have are actually being used fairly. And so, absolutely, there should be a Bill of Rights, like my rights of like what data do you get to see about me when you're making a legal decision or deciding my education rights or things like that. And so, now, is it as broad as like I think some people are asking for, like where, oh no, you can't ever use anything I put on the internet? Well, I don't know about that. I mean, so there's definitely boundaries, but absolutely there's things coming down.
And there are other jurisdictions that are further ahead. GDPR is absolutely having an impact. And you talk about drawing a line between regulation and consumer behavior or corporate behavior. I mean, when was the last time you opened a web page and it didn't ask you to manage your cookies? That's a direct result of regulation. Like, it really is. There's an AI Accountability Act in Canada. Estonia has very strong AI laws. So it doesn't always start here. Sometimes it lands here a little bit later.
Thank you. Hi, Nick Kirsting from Visa. I have a two-part question. With respects to measuring responsible AI, what specific metrics do you use in your technologies? And the second part of the question is, do you find those metrics sufficient, or do you see a need to develop better, more useful metrics? Thanks.
So who wants to answer the question?
It's a great question. There isn't a universal metric. I think each use case is different. We use quality metrics, and quality scores vary across AI models and their requirements, but that's a starting point, but it's one element. We're looking at these diversity studies to measure the responsibility and have a baseline, because it is early days. But like a lot of the technology that powers our world and how we interface with it, it's a bit of art and science too. It goes with governance, corporate governance, transparency. There isn't one pass-fail metric, unfortunately, and I think I'm okay with that right now.
So yeah, so in our platform, with talking with education and like seeing how people use our platform, it comes back to the quality of like how many times did we make the wrong decision based upon the inputs we have, and annotate that and then come back with like actual quality metrics. But you can imagine a fuller kind of viewpoint and there's not one metric, but there's definitely some characteristics of metrics, such as differential privacy. If I'm giving data to my model and I can't come up with like that it's actually private to whatever degree we need it to be, then that's a big problem. You can also do statistical testing of like just doing basic t-tests of how do different populations actually, are they affected by this exam? And so just coming back and saying, what's my population effectiveness, and like what effect do I have being in this population, and so forth. And those are two that I've used a lot. But at the end of the day, you also have to come and say, what makes the most sense for my application? Because it's not going to be clear just from the numbers. Like, it's also how people are using it or why they're using it, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and I think in conversational AI specifically, I think it's a little bit different of an issue because it's because we don't do as much data-driven decision making right along the way. But we oftentimes do look at our standard metrics of containment and fulfillment, and we try to look at that relative to various demographics, right, to make sure that we're having a consistently supported experience across those demographics. So we're not leaving out a segment because, for whatever reason, right, we're not supporting them through the right kind of language or the right kind of prompting. And we do look at that quite a bit in terms of how do we maintain a quality experience, end to end.
David from Shell. I had a question about the regulation part and the responsible AI, that topic that is being pushed to a lot of companies, and how you see this helping innovation for AI to build models. But how does this play a role, responsible AI?
I mean, I think in my space, maybe a little bit less so, right? I mean, it sometimes slows down the process of being able to build a model because you're not able to collect general data, right? So it might take more time to build up a data set. But we put so much emphasis on iteration and starting small potentially, right? And building value from there that, personally for me, I don't see as much of an impact as the conference has gone on, because then it's usually within the control of the company, right? It's their data now. It's not ours. It's not us grabbing public information. It's their data within their environments.
I would argue it actually helps you to innovate in a way that's actually usable by the commercial space. By having these regulations and knowing what the rules are, you're able to push forward solutions that are actually more trustworthy, more acceptable. And if you think about like any R&D, like, yeah, you usually have like a safety net around it or a safety track, but we haven't done that as much with the AI and just release things to the public. But by having regulations say like, no, this actually are the things that make you safer to release your AI systems in production, I think actually makes it so you can go faster, not slower, because you know that it's safe enough. You don't have to sit around the table asking over and over and doing repeated tests. I'm like, no, we followed the rules, we followed the ideas, and we're respecting everybody involved. Let's go. So to me, it's like putting brakes in a car. It helps you go faster, even though it slows you down.
I think it's pretty nuanced. I think it depends on the space. I mean, we have a lot of AI in unregulated space like social, and one could ask, does there need to be more regulation? And then we have very strict regulation in autonomous driving. And regulation is often just a reflection of what society is ready for or not ready for. One could surmise that there'd be far fewer road deaths if we had a larger proliferation of autonomous driving. But society's not ready for that, and the regulations reflect that. It's pretty nuanced.
That's been an awesome discussion. To close it off, let me ask you a question, which we as analysts actually get asked all the time. So if you look in a crystal ball, what will happen in your industry? What do you expect it will look like? Who wants to start? Oh, when? Yeah, that's a good question. Let's say maybe 3 to 5 years out.
I mean, I'll put the rose-colored glasses on, and for me, with a utopian view, like I'd love to live in a world where we can actually harness the data of billions of citizens in a responsible way for better outcomes. Like, imagine ways for healthcare where we're really accelerating outcomes because we've learned to responsibly deal with people's private healthcare data. Humans are an altruistic species. We wouldn't have blood donations or organ donors if we didn't really care for our fellow citizens. But privacy concerns, regulation, doesn't necessarily accelerate that in certain areas. So I'm hopeful that we can get to a place where we can actually harness all of the data that the world can contribute and for better outcomes.
So for the ed tech world, and especially in the personalization that we're providing, we see a world where a lot more folks have access to the education that they need. So in the 1980s, Benjamin Bloom published an article about the 2 sigma problem, where if you try to teach people in a group setting versus a private setting, there's 2 sigmas of learning outcome difference. And we see that with people trying to teach on the internet with MOOCs and lots of other, just putting content on the internet, bringing that personalization and interactivity to that content. We think that we'll actually teach people the skills they need to compete at a higher level in the world at a scale. So it's, the digital divide kind of crushing down and actually helping people get the skills they need to succeed. So.
Yeah, for me, I would just love to see a world where there's just no more bad bots. There's just way too many bad chatbots out there. I'd just love to see a world where there's helpful AI sitting behind conversational agents that actually help you get stuff done in a quick and easy manner. That would be great.
That sounds wonderful. Would you agree? Well, on that happy note, thank you so much, Paul, Andy, Brian. That was a very enlightening conversation, and thanks again for staying with us, answering the questions from the audience too. Let's give a round of applause.